go. Good morning, Bruno.
Hey Nick, how are you?
I'm good and you.
Good.
Good. So, back with another episode of PLA. We're going to continue with your theme that you've been doing over the last couple of weeks for us with regards to student accommodation. Last week, we talked about due diligence before entering into a deal, things that needed to be looked at. Today, I'd like to ask you to just focus on once you've done that due diligence, once you've looked at what you need to, how exactly do you construct the deal going forward?
So how do you construct a student accommodation deal? What are the typical contracts, the typical types of paperwork? What do you need to put into place in order to be able to actually pursue a deal like this? Now, again, this goes back to any business that a person has. There's common features in entering into any business deal. So the first feature is trying to secure the deal. Right now, we want to do this so that the seller cannot sell the land, the business, the assets to anyone else. So you want to secure the deal. Now, how do you go about doing this? So there's often two ways that we experience in practice, right? Now, the first way is simply by way of a letter, right? It's basically a letter of intent. And what this normally does is it shows a seller in good faith your intention, your desire, the seriousness that you have in order to enter into this deal. So this letter goes out and it tells the seller, I am going to do this. Now, this letter is not legally binding, but depending on how it's drafted, it can buy a person a certain period of time. So in the letter itself, maybe it's not legally binding that the sale is going to go through, but it might be legally binding in that the seller is restricted or stops marketing the property or gives you first right. So you have to be smart on how you go about doing this, because simply handing in a letter saying, I want to, that doesn't do anything. Right? So you might land up losing the deal if you simply find somebody else. But this is the start of the conversation. So it is my intention to, and the seller withholds any other marketing until you come back to him, or you've got the first right to go for the sale at that specific price, whatever it is. So you can make it somewhat binding. And I feel that's very important. Now, some of these letters of intent are often accompanied by proof of funds, right? Sellers will not give you the time of day, especially for large transactions. And I'm speaking now more about the larger transactions than the single houses or single properties that people buy. So in a larger transaction, they want to know that you have the money. And that's a big one, because if you're buying for 3 million, 5 million, 8 million, whatever it is, they want to have an understanding that if you're going to buy, how are you going to pay for this? If you speak about paying for it in cash, do you have the money? So often there are proof of funds. So you can either ask the bank for confirmation of the amount of money that a person has in their bank account, or you submit bank statements that are redacted. Sometimes the banks are even willing to issue official letters basically explaining what it is that you have. Some banks will do credit letters to confirm your affordability. In certain circumstances with properties, you might have things like pre-approvals. So there's a bunch of ways that you can actually go about showing that you're good for it, right? That's very important in bigger deals. Now, that normally accompanies the letter of intent, but it does often also accompany an offer to purchase in larger deals. Now, when a person makes an offer to purchase, again, you're entering into a binding agreement, but you don't want it to be binding right now, because there might be things that you want to do first. So you might want to go apply for finance, and you want to make it subject to financing approval, because you might not know if you're going to get the full 100%. And as we discussed last week, you might want to do a due diligence. That's also very, very important in deals like this. And we spoke about all the different types of due diligence. So watch that video about what sort of due diligence you need to put into the contract. But there has to be some form of due diligence in the contract, as an example. So it's either letter of intent or contract. And you want to make the contract, if it's a contract, subject to that type of suspensive condition. So again, the purpose of this suspensive condition is to at least secure the deal. Get the seller away from the idea of selling this property to anyone else, whilst you buy yourself time in order to do the necessary. Now, very, very important, right? Number one, sellers don't want to be taken for a ride. So if you're constructing this deal, don't take advantage of a seller and have these very, very long periods of time for you to conduct. So the seller will not be interested. You're going to lose the seller if you do this. So remember, negotiation is a two-way street. You give a little, you take a little. If it's important for you to conduct the due diligence properly, which it often is, please make sure that you do it within a reasonable period of time, because if you take advantage of that, you lose all credibility in the negotiation. Remember, constructing a deal isn't just about the paperwork, what's in the paperwork, and somebody saying yes or no. It's about actually negotiating. There's a psychological component to every contract, and people that don't understand that, and lawyers that don't understand that, often miss the point that the contracts are fundamental to business, right? Business has massive psychological components to it. You cannot do legal without understanding those components, because then, unfortunately, you're going to land up hurting your client. So very important, in the contract, you have to give and take a little. So you're making this offer, you're making it subject to something over a period of time because you want to secure the deal. Very important. Some of these contracts have things that are called 72-hour clauses. Please be careful, because what is the point of going through all this effort securing the deal, but there's a continued marketing clause, and that's what it is. The seller can continue marketing the property. So what's the point? Right? If the seller can continue marketing the property, why even waste your time making an offer to purchase, making it subject to a suspensive condition, unless there's something in it for you? So read that clause very carefully, because sometimes that clause does give you first dibs at the property. So there has to be something in it that benefits you. Great. So now we've got this contract. We're constructing it. Let's say you do your due diligence. You're happy. Seller's happy. You're happy. Now you want to go ahead with this deal. Great. Now, how do you construct the deal aside from this? So we spoke about the first half. Now it's the second half. The job's not done. Job's not done until you've taken transfer of this property. And remember, transfer does not take place on the same day. It would be great if I could sign on the dotted line, seller signs on the dotted line, we go to the deeds office today, we submit it, and there you go, it's yours. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot that happens in the meantime. For properties to transfer, you have to pay clearance figures, as an example. So come on, clearance figures, you have to apply to the municipality. Now that there's a dispute over the water meter and the water meter number, they have the wrong meter numbers, and now you need to go there and raise issues. You have to go to SARS, and you have to ask SARS, do I have to pay transfer duty? Do I have to pay VAT? There's a whole range of things, and this can take a number of months. So best case scenario, you're probably looking at 2 months, but it takes longer. I mean, I've seen transfers 6 months to a year, sometimes even longer if there's issues. In this period of time, remember, you are buying a business. So you're not buying a property and are simply waiting, and one day when transfer happens, you're going to move into this property and job is done. You're buying a business. So take a step back and think about this as a business. Don't just think about this as a property. There are things happening on the property that need to continue. Business continuity, and I speak to all my commercial clients about this. Business continuity is key. If you're buying a business, you need to make sure that the business continues, because if there's a dip in business in a period of, say, 3 months between the time you sign the contract to the time you take over the business, that is going to impact you. You need to be able to hit the ground running. In fact, with a lot of my clients where we do mergers or any sort of acquisition, I actually suggest that they ramp up the business. All right, they use that period of time in order to get stuck in, learn the systems, actually increase productivity, tweak it a little bit and make it their own. Get to know the staff, get to know everything, all right? Very important. The contract has to provide for this period. So what about lease continuity? You don't want to get caught in a situation where a lease is being terminated or coming to an end somewhere in the middle of this period, and you haven't made contingency for putting in a new tenant. So your contract has to provide for this. It either needs to tell the landlord, the current seller, to do this, or it needs to entitle you as the buyer to be able to now tenant the property with tenants of your choosing. So lease continuity, very important that you've studied these leases. Employment continuity, you're buying buildings, you have caretakers, you've got staff, so sometimes you're actually paying salaries and employees. So that is in our law automatic. You take over those that employment relationship. You need to know your staff members. You need to know what bonuses they're entitled to at the end of the year, if any. You need to know how long they've worked for you, because if there is a possibility of a retrenchment at some point in time, you're going to need to pay them a severance pay. So very, very careful. Insurance over the property. Who's responsible for the insurance over the property? Remember, not every property is insured. So will the seller continue with the insurance up until date of transfer? Or are you going to take over the insurance? Is the insurance sufficient in order to be able to cover you? And with big deals, is it important that you actually endorse the insurance policy with your name, especially if money's been paid over and you're getting stuck into this business, and maybe you're paying money and you already start investing in the business continuity? You might actually want to endorse these policies in order to pay you out if something goes wrong in the business. Because remember, insurance policies aren't just about condition of the building. It could be anything. You have insurance policies that cover you for any sort of risk, including credit risk, debt risk. So you need to make sure that you understand what these policies are about and that you at least continue them or take them over or endorse them or whatever the case is. So during this period, very important that you understand what happens and that you can continue with the business, that you're able to access the bank accounts, you're able to see the payments coming in, you're able to detect delinquencies and defaults so that action can be taken so that when transfer goes through, you don't inherit a property. And guys, especially within a city, be very careful, because what we, and Nick knows this also from experience, what we experience continuously is that there is a domino effect. If one person stops paying rent, suddenly you find that the next person and the next person, and suddenly there's reasons for this, and there's maintenance issues, and suddenly this domino effect where it started with one person was not handled properly and now lands up with no one paying rent in a building where you have to evict possibly 30 tenants. Very important that you continue the business continuity. You get to know the tenants, build the relationships with them, leverage the landlord while you can. One last thing, what sometimes we find in business is that the landlords or sellers sometimes stay in the business a little bit longer after the sale. And the reason for this is if the business has complex systems, especially things like guest houses and that sort of thing, you actually want that IP or that knowledge or experience to guide you a little bit. So it's almost like hiring the seller as a mentor for a period of time in order to facilitate the transfer. So if you are in over your head and you need help, bear this in mind, because you can include it as a provision in the sale where the seller might even make a bit of a salary from it, but just stay on to assist you run this business just a little bit longer so that it continues to be successful.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Bruno.